Hello! Welcome to another episode. In this episode, we are going to talk about more Redstone awesomeness. If you haven't seen the first episode, please go view that one, as some of the things that we talk about in this episode build off of some of the very basic gates. So if you haven't seen the first episode, I'll link a card up in the top right here, and I'll also put it in the description below. So please go ahead and watch that video where I explain the very basic of gates in Redstone. Today we are still continuing on the basic theme, but we are getting just a little bit more complex. And yeah, so before I spoil anything, let's just get right into it. All right, so for the first one, I wanted to talk about how to take Redstone and take it either up or down. The first one I want to show you is called the Torch Tower. It's a very simplest, most compact way to take Redstone up, and that's just called a Torch Tower. And as you can see, we have blocks with torches on top, and it's just alternating all the way up. And as you can see, because of the way that redstone torches work, where if a redstone torch is not receiving power, so right now this lever is off, which means that this redstone torch is on, powering itself, because torches in their default state are on. So this one is on, but because this one is powering this block and this torch is receiving the power from this block, it turns off. And then obviously the reverse happens. This is not receiving any power, which means by default this one should be on, which is powering this block, which means this is off, which is not powering this block, which means the light is off. So in this case, this is a true torch tower in the sense that if this is off, then so is the lamp. And if we turn on the lamp, then the lamp also turns on. We could, if we wanted to, similar to what I talked about in the first episode, where if you have, for example, a NOR gate or a NAND gate where the input is opposite to the output, we could do that on this one as well, where if this was on, the light would be off, and all we would need to do is add one more block with a torch. We would just put a torch here with a block and then the lamp, and then it would be opposite. But that's the easiest, most compact way to take redstone up. This next one is another very efficient way to take redstone up, but as you can see, it's 2 blocks wide instead of just 1 block wide. Still another very good way to take it up, and I actually use this one quite often in my my storage room, my item sorter. So I use this a lot, as you'll see if you watch my live stream on Twitch. You'll see this all the time. But the way this one works is very similar to this one. It's just instead of having the gap here where it has a block with a torch and then a block, this one just alternates blocks, and each block has a torch on it. So this block here is receiving power, which means this torch is off, which is not powering this block, which means this torch is on, which is powering this block, which shuts this one off, and vice versa all the way up. I put the different color on one side so you can see how it's interacting with each other, that this block powers the torch on it, and that torch powers the block above it. So as you can see right now that this is on, you can see the redstone animation there, noting that this is on, but the lamp is off. So same thing if we wanted to actually, so this one's inverted. This would be like a not torch ladder in the sense that the output is opposite to the input. But if we wanted to, we could simply remove this block and place the torch here, or we can add another block and place the torch there, or the lamp, sorry, and that way it would be the same. But in this case, I just made them all the same height, so it just worked out that way. But this does show in that case, if you're restricted with how high you need to take your redstone, depending on what you want the output to be, you may want to use this one, or you may need to use one like this, so that by the time you get to the height you want, you're either proper with you match the input to the output, or you want it the opposite, where the output is opposite to the input. So that is one thing to note, is if you are limited by height, you may want to use one or the other depending on what you want as the end result at the height cap that you have. So you can either do the torch tower or you can do the torch ladder. So the next two, so the first two we talked about were how to take redstone up. The next two I want to show you are how to take redstone down. And this is a lot more complicated than taking redstone up. Redstone up can be very, very simple. Bringing redstone down is a little bit more complex. For some reason, it doesn't seem like it really wants to travel down. And so what we end up with is this one called the torch cascade. So starting at the top where we have the lever, which again is in the powered state, because we notice that one, you see the redstone animation there, and number two, you notice that the torch on the block is off, which means it's receiving power, because again, torches in their default state are on. So then what you do is you have a block gap, and then you have the redstone dust, which will be receiving its power from the torch, and it's currently off, which means that this block is not receiving power, which means this torch is in its default state, which was on, which means it is powering this redstone dust, which in turn deactivates this redstone dust, not powering this one, which leaves this one in its default state, which is powering this one, and so on and so forth, all the way down to the bottom, where again, similar to the torch ladder, we have, because of the height at least, we have it in the NOR position where the output is opposite to the input. But as you can see, if we flick this lever, so right now the output is off, if we flick this lever, this redstone travels down and powers the lamp, and same thing if we turn it off, it travels down and turns it off. So this is the cheapest way to do redstone down, and it's really not that bad. It is, again, same as the tower. The torch cascade does take a 1x2 space, depending on how high you need it to go. So it's not terrible, but it does take up one extra block in width. Moving on to the final example in this video is the Piston Tower. This one is the most compact. It's in a 1x1 space, similar to the Torch Tower, where it's just straight up. This one has it just straight down. This one obviously is not the cheapest one. This one is quite expensive, as you're using two redstone blocks, again, depending on how high you need it to go. This one is not as easily compact, right? As you can see, the modules inside this tower are quite large, right? Each module, technically, because it does involve a piston, is 4 blocks high, including the dust, because we do need this to extend. So it does take up quite a bit of space. So this one is not very good if you're, again, restricted to a very specific height, unless it matches perfectly. If it doesn't match perfectly to the size constraints of each module, then you're going to want to use something like the torch cascade, right, where you can just eliminate a certain number of these if you need to, depending on what you want the output to be, or depending on if you're only limited to, say, 3 blocks like this right here. You couldn't do that with this one, right? It just doesn't fit. You'd have to pick something else. But the way this one works is you power this block, which in turn powers the piston, which extends the block out, which allows this block to sit here, which is close enough to the redstone dust to power it, because technically this redstone dust is taking up this entire block. And so when this redstone block comes here, it actually powers this block. Even though you don't see a block, all you see is redstone dust. So it will receive power, which in turn will power this one, extending this, which will extend this to make contact with this block, which will power the lamp. So I'll show you what that looks like. So if we flick this lever, it extends everything. Oh, I left that block on there. Whoops. There we go. So that one powers that, which extends that and powers that, and goes down and powers the light. And then same thing if you were to depower it, it pulls everything up and depowers the light. So it's a very compact one. I really like it, especially if you do need it to fit within a 1x1 square. But again, you're restricted to, you need to have each module, right? So you need to either have a lever here or an input here, or you have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 blocks up, and it's in those 5 block spaces that this one has to work within. Whereas this one, the Cascade, it's much more like you can customize it, I guess, depending on how high you really need it to go. You can have it with 1, you can have it with the 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever. So that's the 2. This one is nice, but again, it's expensive, very expensive. All right, moving away from how redstone travels and moving more into gates. This one is a clock. So what Redstone can do is you can set up something called a clock, which will allow you to either time something, or if you need something to pulse because you need a dropper or something to expel a certain number of items, not just one. You want it to repeat over and over again. For example, I have an iron store in my the server that I play on, and that what happens is when a customer comes in, a player comes in, he puts in the payment into one chest, and then it activates the redstone, and what the redstone will do is spit out 64 blocks of iron. So that's where I use a clock, because the clock will, loop around 64 times and allow it to spit out the correct number of items. So the way that this one works is, as you can see right now, the clock is not functioning because the lamp is on. But what happens is if I depower this input, the clock will start. And as you can see, the lamp just blinks on and off. And that will do that forever until I give input, which keeps this block powered, which keeps this torch off, which in return does not power this redstone, which does not power the repeater. If I take this input out, that eliminates this being powered all the time. So what happens is, I'll show you when I turn this off, this will become powered, which will power this, which will power this, which in turn will power this, which will deactivate this, which will turn this off, which will turn this off. But because of the timing of the repeater, there is always power running in a circle. So let's turn it off. And as you can see, as soon as this comes on, it powers this, which shuts this off. But because it holds on to the redstone long enough, when this turns off, this turns off, this turns off. But because the power is still there, once this turns off, this turns back on, powering the redstone and turning this back on, and just goes in over and over and over again. Now, one thing you can do is change the timing. If you wanted to have it a faster clock, you can actually, this will burn out the torch. I'll show you, this is the fastest clock. It eventually will burn out the torch. It's just too fast. And all you have to do in that case, if it does burn out, is you just leave it for a little while, and the torch will reset itself, and then it will turn back on. And then, so we could do that and have a slightly slower, but quite a fast one as well. And then if you wanted an even slower clock, then you can just add more repeaters at 4 ticks and that kind of thing. But this clocks are very, very, very useful. We use them all the time in Redstone, but that's a very simple, very basic clock. There's many ways to create clocks, again, depending on how fast or how slow you want it to go, whether you want it to go all the time or you only want it to go when activated, that kind of thing. But clocks are very, very useful. And as you can see, quite basic. Okay, the next gate we have is called an implies gate. So the way this one works is we have input A and input B. And as you can see right now, input A is off and input B is on, and output is also on. Now what happens now is, because input A is off, input B has no control over the output. Does absolutely nothing. But if we power input A, then input B controls the output. So uses for this would be if you need something where you can lock the use of it, right? Where if you want something to function but only during certain conditions, then you would use an implies gate. Sometimes, like in either a store, if you want where you're using a lever or something like that, and other people will come and visit your store, but you don't want them to activate the door, then you'd put this lever in, and to them it would be useless. It doesn't seem to be doing anything. But for you, you could have, for example, a hidden second input, where as soon as you activate that second input, it's going to allow you to then control and get the input or output that you want from that lever that is visible. So again, if we have this on, then input B can control the output. If input A is off, then nothing happens with input B. So this gate is a very good gate if you want to lock a redstone for some reason, whether this needs to be a condition like an item on a pressure plate, or a mine cart sitting on a depowered rail, trip or on a detector rail, right, where it has to be some kind of a condition. Whereas this one, because the condition isn't met, then the state or the output can't be controlled by input B. But as soon as that condition is met, then you're able to control it with input B. A very, very, again, very useful gate. As you can see, quite basic. All we have is input A going into a block with a torch on the side. Input B is coming off to next to the block, and then just redstone straight into the lamp. So again, very basic, but very, very powerful and very, very useful. All right, and now this brings us to the last gate of the video, the XOR gate. This one I did include in the basics of redstone because it is basic. I mean, it can get a bit complicated. It does look overwhelming, but it does build off of the basic gates that we already have, and I will explain how all of that works in a moment. But both of this one and this one are an XOR gate. I just wanted to show you two different ways of building it. This one is much more compact and more common. You'll see this one a lot more, just again because it's more compact and more resource friendly. But this one is really hard to wrap your head around what is actually happening and how an XOR gate works. So similar to an OR gate, whereas if you've seen that first video, that's where I explain what an OR gate is. An OR gate's output will be on if input A is on, or input B is on, or both. It's still on. The only time an OR gate is not powered is if both inputs are off. The difference between an OR gate and an XOR gate is an XOR gate, the input is only on if the output is only on if the inputs are opposite. So as you can see, the output is off and so are the inputs. They are both off. If I turn input A on, the light does come on. If I turn input A off and turn input B on, the light comes on, right? So if A is on or B is on, the output will be on. But if both inputs are on, then it turns off. Similar to both outputs being off, it is also off. So an XOR gate is really, really nice if you only want the output to be on if input A and B are opposed to each other. A real world use for this is 2 light switches for the same room, right? So you walk into your living room from the front door side and you want the light on, so you turn on the lamp, right? But you leave out of the living room through the kitchen side and there's another light switch there. You don't want to have to walk all the way to the front door side of the living room to flick the same switch. So instead, you just flick the switch at the kitchen side and it turns off. Then you come back in, say the next day into the living rooms from the same side, the front door side. So you just flick that switch and the light turns on. Then again, you leave the living room through the kitchen side and you switch that one and it turns it off. So that is a real world situation of where XOR gates are used all the time. If you used an OR gate in that situation, that would not work, right? Because you come in through the front door and you turn on your light. Then you leave to go out through the kitchen side and you try and turn the light off, but it doesn't turn off, right? This light switch can't do anything to turn on or off the lamp. So you have to walk all the way over to the other side to turn off the light. So that's what makes an XOR gate so powerful. So what I wanted to do was, because this one is hard to wrap your head around how it actually works, is I built this one to show you how an XOR gate is actually working, what is actually happening and how it works. And I've color coded the wool to match the compact version so you can kind of relate to what exactly is happening here when it's much easier to see what's happening here. So I'm gonna, if you feel free to pause the video right here and take a look at the redstone and see if you can figure out exactly what is happening and why the output behaves the way that it does. So I'm gonna explain how that all happens with this redstone here. So as we can see, the output is currently off. You can ignore this second output over here. I just had it because when I was building it and doing my testing, I just needed an output a little bit easier to see than the one way up there. So you can disregard this second output. So the way this works is, at this point, both outputs are off. Now, if you've noticed, and hopefully you have by now, especially if you've seen my first video where I explained the NAND gate, we have 4 NAND gates in an XOR gate. As you can see, input A comes into the left side of the first NAND gate and the left side of this NAND gate. Input B comes into the right side of the first NAND gate and the right side of the next NAND gate. So in this condition, input A is not powering this block and input B is not powering this block, which means this NAND gate is on, right? Because neither of these are receiving power, so the output is opposite, right? So because these are opposite, they are in turn powering the left side and right side of these 2 NAND gates. But because this side is still powered because this is not sending power to this block, right? So these torches are in their default state. This NAND gate is outputting power. But because this corner here and this corner here are outputting power to the same NAND gate at the end, just the left side with the green here and the purple side on the right, this end result is off, which means the lamp is off. Okay? So as you can see, that's how that is working right now. Because these 2 middle NAND gates do have one of these powered, that means that this end result is unpowered. So if we take a look, and let's reverse this. So we turn input B on and input A on, and now we come up and look. This end NAND gate is exactly the same as it was before, still off. But if we take a look at the rest, they've all reversed, right? This one is now completely off, which means these 2 inner torches are on, but because the 2 inputs are on, these 2 outer torches are off. However, because with NAND gates, you need both of these off in order to deactivate the power coming out. Because this is no longer powered because the inputs are on, then these middle torches are powered, which means it's sending power on both sides of the final NAND gate, which again deactivates it. Last time, when the inputs were both off, this torch was on and this torch was on, which meant this was still powered, which means this was not. So now let's take a look at if we swap one. So let's turn input A off, which means the output is now on. Why? That's because input A is off, which means this here is in its default state, which means this is sending power down the center. Because this is sending power down the center, it deactivates this lamp, but because this is not powering this one is in its default state, which means this NAND gate is still sending power to the final NAND gate, which deactivates this torch. However, on the B side, because this is powering this block, this torch turns off, and because of the A gate being off and this torch being in its default state, this NAND gate is still powered, which means it's sending power to this NAND gate and deactivating this torch, which means this NAND gate is not sending any power to the final NAND gate, which means that the torch on the final NAND gate is in its default state, which means that this NAND gate going to the output is going to send power to the output, right? With a NAND gate, as long as one of the torches is on, then the power will be sent. So the same thing, what can we expect if we were to flip A on and B off? What we can expect is this just to be completely opposite, right? So instead of this torch being on, this torch will be on. These 2 torches will be on. This one will be on. These 3 will be off. This one will be on and this one will be off. But this will still be powered because this is on. So if we take a look, we'll flip B and A. Right? So then we have the same thing, it just reversed. These 3 are now off, whereas it was these 3 that were off. And instead, it's just flipped to the other side, which means this NAND gate does have one of them on, which means that it is still sending power. So I hope that makes sense, and that's exactly what's happening here. The same thing is happening, right? This torch, input A, is powering both the green, this one, and this side of the blue, right? But because both inputs are on, that blue one, right, this torch is off. As you can see, it's not sending any power, right? Which you get down to the green and the purple, right? The torches here do not power the final output. But that's why I built this one, just because it is, for me, when I saw this one, it made way more sense of how an XOR gate works, why it works, and why it's just so powerful, right? That when you're leaving different rooms or you want to be able to turn the light on or off, you know, with two different switches, this is what you want to use. But this is the most compact way to build it, and it works exactly the same way. But yeah, hopefully this one made a lot more sense. This one, you kind of just, I still have a hard time wrapping my head around exactly what's happening inside this one, even though it's so compact. It should be simple, but it's still a bit more complicated. This one makes a lot more sense. This one you would just need to memorize on how to build it, really. Unless it does make sense to you, then feel free to go nuts and build it out of just knowing how it works. But this one, yeah, definitely makes a lot more sense of how it actually works. All right, guys. Well, I hope that made sense. If it didn't, then rewatch it maybe, or just leave some comments down at the bottom here and let me know if you still have any questions. But yeah, I hope you liked the episode. I hope it helps you understand Redstone. I hope you're able to better use Redstone in your own worlds. I find Redstone to be one of the best components in Minecraft. I love working with it. I love how simple it really is, especially if you just break it down and understand each component. But I just love the power of Redstone and the things that it allows you to do in this game. So guys, I really hope you like this episode. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and click that bell icon so that you can be notified when I post more of these videos. If you got something out of this episode, hit the like button and let me know down in the comments what you loved about the video. Again, if you have any more questions, or if you want to see any other Redstone gates or components, or if you have better, more efficient ways of building some of these things, please let me know down in the comments. All right, guys, thanks, and I will see you in the next episode.